All right, it's Pro Bono with Ed Nahhat, where we talk about the law with lawyers and other miscreants. Today's guest is Joe Buttiglieri, my good friend Joe. How are you, Joe?
Good. I want to know if I'm a lawyer or a miscreant.
That's up to you, and maybe it's up to our audience.
Fair enough.
Thanks for joining us today, Joe. You are our first guest.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ed.
You know why? Because
I'm the oldest one here?
Well, that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today. I mean, how long you've been practicing. It's amazing to me because I see you here every day, and I know you've been practicing longer than me, but I feel the weight of it. I'm over 30 years in. How many years have you been practicing?
Well, Ed, this year I'll celebrate 48 years. I've been practicing since November of 1976.
So that was before the internet, right?
Well, before you were born, probably.
No. I was in high school. Okay,
All right.
But seriously, that's such an interesting time. You're practicing in '76. You're fresh out of law school, and there's no internet. There's no email. How did lawyers communicate with each other?
Phone and letters. That was it. There's no
Letters.
email.
Yeah. Did you have?
Or in person. I mean, obviously we had meetings.
And you had carbon paper.
When I started, we were still using carbon paper. Photocopiers came out probably about the time I started practicing.
Well, the key is what I'm always interested in with guys whose practice starts then and passes through this era is how you adapt and how you stay energetic and how you stay engaged with the client who, you know, has all these changes they have to go through, the business client, the trust client. How do you adapt?
Well, you have to learn. You have to learn new things. It's you have to keep learning. You have to be open to learning. You have to be open to legal education. And so I've been very fortunate in that very early in my career, I became acquainted with the Institute for Continuing Legal Education, not only for my own education, but I was invited by ICLE to start speaking. And I found that has helped keep the law fresh for me because every time I speak for ICLE, I have to do research. I have to re-educate myself in different areas of the law.
Oh, that's ICLE you're talking
ICLE, I call it ICLE.
Okay, so
It's the Institute for Continuing Legal Education.
They're the folks out in Ann Arbor, right?
They're based in Ann Arbor out of the University of Michigan.
See, this is the thing. I don't know if you know this, but the first time I ever saw you, or ever was aware of you, was at a seminar, and you were the speaker. And I was a younger attorney. I went to the seminar, and I thought, that guy's good. And you held the audience. You gave a speech about probate law, and it was one of those big rooms at Wayne County. Do you remember this?
I do.
Yeah, and I thought, I want to be like that guy, and it was really impressive.
Well, I'll pay you the $5 for saying that later.
Yeah,
Right?
all these years later, right?
But I've enjoyed public speaking in general. Yeah. Maybe it's because I'm a big ham. Maybe it's because I think sometimes I have a message to give. And it reminds me of what I'm doing when I'm in court. I like being in court and I'm representing my client. One of the reasons it stays fresh for me is because I enjoy what I'm doing. As I often say when people say, I can't believe you're still doing it, it's not like I dig ditches. It's an intellectual pursuit. As long as my mind is working, as long as I'm reasonably healthy, I can do it. And I don't have any particular reason to walk away from it. Generally speaking, I like my clients, I like what I do, and most of the time, I like the judges I appear before.
Well, they certainly like you, Joe. I mean, I've come to know you. I've worked with you now for over 10 years, and everywhere I go, all across the Tri-County area, all across Michigan, I don't know anyone who doesn't like Joe Buttiglieri. People who are your adversaries, people who have cases with you. I know lawyers who have cases against you and with you at the same time. And it's really impressive. That's why I wanted you to talk to me today, because it's a unique kind of personality or reputation that you've developed that other lawyers and who are watching this might want to emulate. So how is it that you can have an attorney at another law firm be an adversary in one case and then refer a case to you the very next case? How can that happen?
I think I actually have a partial answer for that, Ed. My parents raised me to treat everybody like I want to be treated myself. I try to keep that in mind every day. I'm not perfect at it, but The fact that you're opposing counsel doesn't mean that you're my enemy. It means you've got a job to do. I've got a job to do. I want to treat you like I want to be treated by you. And that's true of clients. That's true of judges. I mean, some judges, sometimes you get in front of them and they seem a little cranky. Maybe they're having a bad day, but most of the time, judges are there to do their job, and they want to help us, and they want to do what's right for the clients. And the way to get that done is to treat the court, the client, and opposing counsel and co-counsel like you would want to be treated yourself.
It's interesting because you evolved your practice not only to be an effective advocate, but as a mediator, it seems like you've developed this whole nother area where you're like one of the go-to mediators in the state. I know of 3 or 4 mediators in your field that are in the top. And wherever I go, Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, lawyers are always saying to me, in fact, I had one recently, Joe, where I have a case where it's very contentious, and the lawyer says to me, well, I would mediate the case with Buttiglieri. And I say, well, I can't because he's my partner. He says, oh, yeah, I guess.
Well, they could waive that. They could let me do it anyway.
I mean, he instantly wants to mediate with you without realizing that we're in the same firm. And that's how good your reputation is as a mediator. And so how do you get that? How do you get that in a mediation session?
I think for most of the mediation I do, and I know this is not exactly the mediation training, I think I'm valuable to the attorneys and I'm valuable to the clients because of my experience in probate. So 95% of the mediations I do involve probate law and probate issues. Plus, most of the attorneys that come to me have dealt with me one way or another. They've either seen me in court, they've seen me at an ICLE seminar like you first did, they've been against me on a case, they've been with me on a case, and they know that whatever else I do, I tend to I make it my hallmark to treat people fairly and to listen. I think one of the reasons some mediators are very successful and others aren't is mediators that listen and listen to the story, both from the attorneys and from the clients, can make a difference, because if you listen, you can start to find pathways to settlement.
I was talking to you the other day about when you started out, and it's similar to when I started out, because when I started out, believe it or not, there wasn't email. I know
I believe that.
I'm younger than you, but there wasn't email, and I came up into practice where you had to talk to the other lawyer. You had to talk to him. You called him on the phone. You dialed his number, and you got him on the phone, because that's the only way you could communicate. You could write a letter. Letters went in the mail. And if you had a hearing the next day or that Friday, you had to talk to the guy or the lady on the phone. And then when you went to the courthouse, you had to meet them in person, shake their hand, talk to them in the hallway. And there was some benefit to the connection that you would make. Talk to them on the phone is a lot different than email, right?
Well, lately, when I go to court and I run into lawyers that I haven't seen sometimes since pre-COVID for 3 or 4 years,
yeah.
I'm just so thrilled to see them.
Yeah.
I don't even remember whether I like them or don't like them, or if we had a bad experience last time. I'm happy to see people. I like to think of myself as a people person, and I think lawyers that deal with clients a lot and that go to court better be people person because you have to deal with the court clerks. Maybe more important than how you talk to the judge. You have to deal with the opposing counsel. You've got to deal with your client. You've got to talk to your client about how to behave in court. And we've lost a lot of that. While I'm in favor of Zoom, I'm not anti-Zoom. And it can be very useful for certain aspects of the practice of law. We've lost something in terms of the amount of personal contact. It used to be that I was in court almost daily.
Yeah.
Several times a week I would be in court. 3 times a week was not that unusual. You run into other lawyers. You often had your client with you. And that's all changed. Many times now, my clients are not even in the same room with me when we're on a Zoom hearing. Worse yet, we're in a waiting room and we're not even seeing what kind of mood the judge is in that day, or so that you can sort of judge how you're going to make your presentation.
But yesterday, you were in court, in live court, and you had, 3 matters in the same courthouse?
I originally had 4 matters up in either 2 different courthouses, but two of them ended up by Zoom. One ended up in person. I took the one in person. You covered one for me.
I covered one, yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember who else covered for me yesterday.
Here's the file from yesterday. Okay.
Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome. I took care of that for you. That was on Zoom. And then I had another Zoom, and it's fascinating because Zoom or its equivalent in Florida. I have a case in Florida, so they don't use Zoom in Florida courts, but it can be very efficient. But I agree, there's something that you miss out. Like, for example, when I first started practicing, it was fun to have the client right there. You could talk to, you could work out a deal right there. You go in the back room with the judge and the other lawyers, and you could work out a lot of settlements right there. And now you can't really work out settlements.
Well, I remember a time that it was almost de rigueur, where the court would say, Mr. Buttiglieri, I want you and Mr. Nahhat to go into the jury room and talk this over and see what you can work out on these discovery issues. Or I want you, Mr. Nahhat, and your respective clients to go into the jury room. Take as much time as you need. Don't come back here unless you have a settlement.
A lot of people ask me the same question I'm going to ask you. Why did you become a lawyer? I think it's important that our clients know that when you choose to become a lawyer, you do it for a reason that matters, and that you're not just about the billable hour, or you're not just about the, walking around a courthouse acting important, that it matters to you. And I know what matters to me about it. But I wanted to know, you said something in some notes that you gave me that really impressed me. And if you don't mind me...
I hope you're going to tell me what I said, because I don't remember what I wrote.
Yeah, I know you don't. But you said that and this is what really impressed me, Joe. You said that you chose to become a lawyer to help maintain a civil society. And I want you to expand on that.
Ed, I grew up in the late 60s. I grew up all through the 60s, mm-hmm. But I grew up at a time when there was a lot of conflict going on. Conflict about the Vietnam War, mm-hmm. Conflict about hair length, if you can believe that. How could boys have long hair, mm-hmm. or would they be kicked out of school? How short a woman's skirt could be, or a teenage girl's skirt should be, or she'd be kicked out of school. And so as I saw this, and I saw the incivility that was going on, people screaming at people because of their hair length, mm-hmm. or people treating our veterans, people who were returning from war, screaming at them as though they made a choice to start the Vietnamese War. Mm-hmm. These were servicemen that were serving their country. And it appalled me from both sides, mm-hmm. not because I was pro the war so much as these were guys like you and me that probably got drafted. It was a time there was a lot of controversy over the draft. Yeah. And so I lived through a time that society didn't feel very civil. And I don't want to live someplace where we solve our problems with guns and knives. It's anathema to me. It's not the way I was raised. Mm-hmm. And so I began to see the law as a way to preserve civil society, as a way to resolve issues without resort to guns and knives and violence. Mm-hmm. And certainly when I was younger and maybe not as sophisticated as I am now, or I hope I'm a little more sophisticated, I thought of it as almost strictly in terms of the criminal law. And I initially envisioned myself that somehow I would be the next Clarence Darrow. I would be a criminal lawyer. Well, as I became better educated and began to understand what the law is about, I was very attracted to civil practice. Though I did criminal practice for a while, I never found it that satisfying. Mm-hmm. But civil practice gives us an opportunity for people to solve their problems, even if they can't amicably solve their problems, to get those matters resolved without resorting to violence, without resorting to subterfuge or terrible behavior, by going into the courts. That's why I believe it's so incredibly important that our courts have the trust and confidence of the average person. And if people respect the courts, then they'll respect the decisions of the courts.
Yeah.
That's a civil society for me. That's what I meant. I still feel that way today. And it's one of the reasons I can still get excited about practicing law almost 48 years later, because most of the time I feel like I am helping people. I feel like I am giving value for what I charge.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, it's expensive to hire lawyers. Litigation is expensive. And I'm never embarrassed to say that to people so that they understand what they're getting into. But we give value. It's much better to spend money on litigation than it is to devolve into an uncivil society.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's a couple other things I want to talk to you about before we wrap up, okay?
We're almost done?
Almost.
Oh, God, I thought we were spending the day together.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have lots of days to spend together,
All
Joe.
right, fair enough.
Up and down the hallway. But you were talking about when you first started out doing some criminal work. And I have some experience with that, too. When I first started out, I hung my own shingle, and I did criminal appointments. But you told me a story once about criminal appointments that I never got even close to. You told me that you were like the lawyer for the day in 36th District Court.
It was, I think they used to call it, and I hope this isn't an appropriate, queen for the day. You would be appointed to one courtroom for the day from 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, whenever the judge started, until court closed. Theoretically, you were there till 4:30.
So this is right after you get your bar license?
I was a relatively young lawyer. Yeah, it was certainly within the first 2 or 3 years of my practice. You went and sort of, I'm not saying you threw your card in a goldfish bowl, but you threw your name into a hat, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you might have to talk with the particular judge. And if you were fortunate, the judge would appoint you, and you'd find out usually a couple weeks ahead of time. You'd be assigned, for example, April 12th, you're on, and they would tell you what courtroom you were assigned to and what judge you were assigned to. And you would go there, and you would be the pro bono or the free legal counsel.
Pro bono is the name of this show.
Well, how about that? I wanted to work that in there for you. You'd be the pro bono lawyer for misdemeanor cases where people didn't have a lawyer, and they wanted to process those cases like that in one day.
Okay.
So you would literally be representing prostitutes, the Johns, if the Johns didn't have their own lawyer, and other misdemeanor kinds of things. But of course, as a young attorney, I was very impressed representing prostitutes and Johns. And I don't want to get salacious. It was interesting work. They were interesting people.
I bet.
Sometimes I think there, but for the grace of God, go I, or go people we know. And so I found that fascinating work. The other thing I did at the same time was you'd be assigned for a 24-hour period to be the police lineup attorney.
That's the one I was thinking of.
And the police lineup thing was a fascinating.
That's like night court, man. That's like you were like night court, dude. Like
sometimes you get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say this, but I think sometimes the police did it on purpose.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
And so you'd get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You'd have to wear a coat and tie. You needed to look like the lawyer. And you would go down to I would go to the first precinct in Detroit, and you would go to the lineup room, and there was always a sergeant in charge, and he was so invariably sort of a gruff guy. Yeah. You're here finally, counselor. Get in there. And you would help organize, or you would give an opinion on the lineups, and you would sign off on the lineups. You did not advise any. You were not there to advise any of the people that were in the lineup, but you could change the order of the lineup. You could say that person shouldn't be in the lineup.
It was more suggestive, or
it was. Well, you would tell the police what you would approve, and then you would sign off on it. And so they couldn't do a lineup without an attorney there. My job, or the job of that attorney, was to make sure that the lineup was fair.
Well, it seems to me that those early days, those early experiences, inure to your benefit eventually, because you earn your stripes, as it were, and the cops respect you, and the judges respect you, and you do the right thing along the way, and you run into them later, and you just build your reputation, right? You build your practices.
It helped build your reputation. It helped you to learn how to talk with police officers respectfully, and to be spoken with too respectfully, and to let them know you weren't. I wasn't always defending
Right.
bad guys. I could represent the police department. I could represent people that just were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
And so I found that very useful. And it was great to deal with judges where you were, as I called it, I think it was called Queen for the Day. That's not the formal title.
Yeah.
But, you got to know the judges. Sometimes the judge might call you back into chambers and say, tell you point blank, I don't think you handled that right, counselor. And the next time you have that kind of case, think about this. So it was a great education. It was a great experience.
Speaking of education and experience, isn't it true that for a time before you came to Kemp Klein, there were some years that you worked with Alan May?
Alan May was my first, the firm May and May was not my first position. It was my second position as an attorney.
Interesting. So for those of us who...
Wait, May, I've got it reversed. It was my first job out of law school. I worked at May and May while I was in law school, and it was my first legal position.
Okay.
And I stayed there for, I think, a year or two before I moved on.
I love that story because, Mr. May, Alan May, is going to be a guest on this program.
Well, remind him that I brought him.
Yeah, I know. That's what I love about this story.
And as a result of that good relationship and friendship that we built up, when he started thinking about doing something else, he confided in me, and I convinced him to interview here. And the rest is history. Alan's been here with us now for more than 25 years, I think.
Well, whatever year it was, I'm glad you did it because Alan May is the reason that I joined this firm 10 years ago.
Not me?
I didn't know you well enough, but you were definitely a part of it.
When you were doing so well, now you break my heart.
When I saw the lineup, I knew the Babe Ruth of Kemp Klein was here. That's what I call you. And Alan May was the Casey Stengel of Kemp Klein, so he's the baseball man.
All right. Well, he would like to know he's the manager, or as he likes to say, the field general.
Yeah, right. So I got to talk to you about Buttiglieri, okay?
One of my favorite cases.
I know. I want to talk to you about it because you go from police lineup and then a bunch of years later, the internet, things happen, and then you have this big case called Buttiglieri, and it changes the law, doesn't it?
I think it did change the law, and I think it's still good law to this day.
Yeah, and I think it's important if we have some trust clients watching this, that they hear from you. What? I mean, these are fancy words, Joe. I'm not even sure what they mean anymore. And I study this stuff all the time. What is the doctrine of election? What is acquiescence and ratification? Well,
I think I'd put you all to sleep if I talk about that.
Yeah,
but here's the bottom line. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Okay. You can't say, give me the money that I'm owed under the trust. That's what happened in Buttiglieri. There was a trust. There was a second marriage. And the children from the first marriage had rights under the father's trust, under their father's trust. And it was to, if I remember correctly, it was to each receive $50,000. Well, the attorney that was representing the trustee wanted them to sign not just a receipt, but sign a waiver that they received the $50,000 and that's all, and that they acknowledged and waived any further rights against the estate.
Right.
They were represented by a law firm, and they said, heck no, we're not signing that. We're owed that money. If the trust says we're owed the money, so pay us the $50,000 and we'll sign a receipt. And that's what happened. They signed a receipt. They then...
No waiver.
No waiver.
Got it.
They then took the money and started a lawsuit to challenge the trust. So the very cake that they had taken a slice out of, they now wanted to say the cake didn't exist, that it was void. Well, if it was void, how did you get your $50,000? You should have taken other inheritance or some other document. And that's what offended me, quite frankly.
Yes, I can tell. It still does.
And my father, who was not a lawyer, had said to me years, you can't have your cake and eat it too. I never knew what that meant until Buttiglieri came along. I always looked at my father like, what's he talking about, But Buttiglieri came along, and suddenly I understood what it meant.
Yeah.
You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't do both.
Right.
And so I actually made that part of my oral argument. I don't think I put it into the written pleadings, but I made that part of my oral argument in front of the judge, and we won all the way to the Supreme Court on that. Now, we didn't have to argue it in the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court declined cert.
Which means...
But we won in the Court of Appeals. And to this day, it's still good law.
And everyone loves Joe Buttiglieri, and now I know why. And I really appreciate you telling me about how you treat people, because it's a little bit of a tip that I think all lawyers can use, and I can definitely use, because your adversary isn't always your adversary, you know?
Might be your best friend, maybe not your best friend, but it might be on the same side the next day.
Yeah.
My adversaries are the people I want them to think of me as somebody that they can call as a mediator. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, as I get older, I'm moving my practice more toward mediation, less toward confrontational litigation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Well, thanks for joining us on Pro Bono, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
It's really great to get to know you, and I hope that our clients and our friends and our attorney friends and judges who watch this will get a few chuckles out of it.
Chuckles?
Yeah.
No, I just want them to call me.
Yeah, right. Good one.